Hello, everyone. My name's Tim. You're watching Lost in Law. I bring the common understanding of the law to the common person. Today, we are going to be looking at the Alec Baldwin shooting on the movie set of Rust. It made news recently because it was announced that prosecutors intend to charge Alec Baldwin and armorer Hannah Gutierrez Reed with 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Now, the 2 counts allow for the jury flexibility for accepting a set of facts that will lead to the conviction. So, for the purposes of this video, we're just going to go along the lines of the involuntary manslaughter stems from the singular incident. We're just going to treat it in the singular, even though they're going to be officially charged with 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter, because the facts are going to still be the same. It's up to the jury to apply the law correctly to the set of facts and determine guilt or acquittal. So let's talk about, actually, there were 3 people charged, but one is going to plead out, and that was going to be the first assistant director, David Halls, who handed Alec Baldwin the gun in question. So he's going to plead no contest to negligent use of a deadly weapon. And I mean, he's going to be found guilty. That's the short of it. He's going to be found guilty, and I assume he'll be sentenced at some point this year. We'll learn about that eventually. So we have the armorer, who's responsible for preparing the gun and leaving it on a cart so that it can be used during the filming. The assistant director is the one who retrieved the gun from the cart and was supposed to check that it was safe and clear. He then handed it to Alec Baldwin, the actor, who was performing a scene. And during this scene, the gun discharges for whatever reason and kills, I think her name was Halyna. Yeah, Halyna. Halyna? Yeah, Halyna. I think Halyna is how you say it. Halyna Hutchins. So she was killed. There was another member of the crew who was wounded in the shoulder. So it's actually interesting they're not including another charge for the assault, but we'll just we'll put that aside for a moment. In any case, that was the chain of events. Alec Baldwin maintains that he never pulled the trigger on the gun, that the gun went off accidentally. All 3 people claim that there should not have been a live round in that gun. None of them know how a live round got into the gun. So let's have a look at the New Mexico statutes that are going to apply to this case. So we're here in manslaughter, New Mexico codes. Chapter 2, Article 2. So we're under the homicide section, and we're looking at manslaughter. That's the citation there. Which is manslaughter is the unlawful killing of a human being without malice. If it was with malice, it's a murder. So killing a human being without malice is manslaughter. We're not worried about the voluntary manslaughter because, as you can see here, it's a narrow definition, and it clearly does not apply to this situation. Now, if you want a more in-depth breakdown of the chain of events and their legal ramifications, I highly suggest that you watch the video by my buddy Ian Runkle. He did an excellent breakdown of this case. He's a firearms expert. He's an experienced trial lawyer. His insight would be so much more valuable than mine. I want to give you the perspective of a law student. What does a law student see when they read news articles like this? What do law students see when certain facts are alleged, and how we link them with the law? Because we're still learning at this point. And so some of these things I've covered in my first year criminal law class. And it's actually really interesting how now that I've received the education, that my eyes can be trained to spot this kind of stuff. So that's the perspective I'm going to bring here, which may be more helpful to people who are not lawyers. because you want the common understanding of the law, the way that people who haven't, don't have decades of experience in litigation see the law. So I hope you find this valuable. If you like it, hit like, hit subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Small upcoming channel. It's nice to see hard work pay off. All right, let's get into the meat of this video. We're going to have a quick read through of the law regarding involuntary manslaughter. It consists of a manslaughter committed in the commission of an unlawful act not amounting to felony, or in the commission of a lawful act which might produce death in an unlawful manner, or without due caution and circumspection. All right, what does all that mean? Well, in our first year criminal law class, we're looking at two very broad categories of the elements of a crime. The actus reus, which is the guilty act, and the mens rea, the guilty mind. To prove that someone is guilty of any criminal offense, you have to establish that they A, committed the act in question, and B, had the requisite mental state to meet the standard of criminality. Now, mens rea is on a ladder, and you've seen me talk about this in the willful blindness video, which I believe is episode 4. I'll correct that if it's not. It probably wasn't. Whatever. I think willful blindness might be. It was 4 or 5, one of those videos. But in that video, I went through the ladder of mens rea. Of course, intent is at the top of the ladder. When you intend a certain outcome, it was an outcome that you fully were aware of and wanted to bring about. Murder's the classic example, especially first-degree murder. You premeditated murder, you planned it, you wanted this guy dead, and you made that guy dead. That's intent. Knowledge we use in the context of possession a lot. So knowledge, you can't be guilty of certain possession crimes unless the Crown can prove, or in the US, the state can prove that you knew what you were carrying was an illegal substance and that you knew you were carrying it. Right? So actual knowledge. That means appreciating the consequences of your actions. Of course, a standard under that is recklessness. Recklessness is knowing the danger or the risk that your conduct was going to lead to harm or a wrong, and you proceeded despite that risk. Now, that is always assessed in the subjective lens. What did you know at the time? Not what you should have known at the time. That's an important distinction, because when we get down to negligence and carelessness, you are that is mens rea that is assessed through an objective lens. What was the reasonable standard, and did you depart that standard? You're going to see the word negligence come up a lot while we're talking about this. So it's important to understand negligence is actually it's a really complicated part of law. You could teach an entire course about the tort and the criminal definitions of negligence. I think there's even negligence in contract law. I don't know. We haven't gotten to that chapter yet in the first year contract law class, but negligence is a huge field, and I couldn't possibly cover all of the little bits and pieces and all the exceptions. I'm just going to focus on how negligence applies in this context with this set of facts. So, people who are experienced in handling firearms know that there are certain rules, standards that you would apply. You should never point a loaded firearm at someone. That's a pretty simple rule. Now, in Canada, where you cannot own firearms unless you are licensed by the government, and part of that licensing process involves taking a safety course, that's common knowledge. It's very safe to assume that that is common knowledge among gun owners. A reasonable person, I think this is without controversy, but a reasonable person would never point a loaded gun at another person. Okay, so that is the base that we start from. Now, what is the actus reus of involuntary manslaughter? Well, it says it right here, and you just read the statute, right? This is just a lesson of statutory interpretation. Just read the words they put on the paper. The guilty act is the commission of an unlawful act not amounting to felony in which a manslaughter results. So you can get into a full conversation of causation, but it is, again, in this set of facts, there is no question that the firearm caused the camera woman's death. So we're not gonna talk a lot about causation. But yeah, the guilty act is the commission of an unlawful act that causes a manslaughter, which of course is just the unlawful killing of a human being without malice. Now, what is the guilty mind? What is the mens rea? If this is the act, right? Commission of the unlawful act, the mens rea is whatever the mens rea for the unlawful act is. Now, there's exculpatory mens rea here, right? Without malice is an exculpatory mental state. If you had intended to kill the camera woman with a prop gun and you loaded a live round into it, that's murder. We're not there. Those are not the facts of the case. So that's the end of the discussion on that. Of course, I'm sure you're wondering, what is negligent use of a deadly weapon? So let's have a look here. The negligent use of a deadly weapon consists of discharging a firearm into any building or vehicle, or so as to knowingly endanger a person or his property. That one doesn't apply here because the key word here is discharging a firearm as an intentional act. Alec Baldwin alleges that the gun went off by accident. Even so, even if he did pull the trigger, he did not know a live round was in there. So he had no intention to discharge a firearm. So that's not going to meet the criteria here. The situations this does apply to is just shooting into a building, right? You grab a firearm, you shoot into a building, and you start laughing, right? That's negligent use of a deadly weapon. All right. Carrying a weapon while under the influence of an intoxicant or narcotic. Again, facts not in evidence, right? There's nothing to suggest that Alec Baldwin was drunk, high, or any other altered state of mind. It may come out in trial, but for now, there's no allegation of such. So that one doesn't apply. Endangering the safety of another by handling or using a firearm or other deadly weapon in a negligent manner. I think this is the one. This is the one that the state is going to try and prove. Of course, 4, discharging a firearm within 150 yards of a dwelling or building probably doesn't apply. I think 3 is the one they're going to go with. Handling or using a firearm or other deadly weapon in a negligent manner. Now, I already talked at length about negligence, but thankfully, if you come down here, there actually is a definition of negligence and a couple of citations, a couple of authorities here. So negligent just means omitting to do something which a reasonable man, guided by those considerations which ordinarily regulate the conduct of human affairs, would do, or doing something which a prudent and reasonable man would not do. It's actually a pretty simple definition, right? If the conduct makes you scratch your head and say, why are you doing that? That looks dangerous. There's a very good chance you're being negligent. Again, in the context of people. Now, actually, I think it's worth mentioning, at least in Canadian law, negligence doesn't take into account, when they use the reasonable person standard, they do not take into account your level of education and training. They do take into account the context of a specific scenario around the facts that led to the crime. So, for example, the weather conditions, the lighting conditions, those are all relevant. What's not relevant is your experience in handling firearms, your training in handling firearms. Those are rendered neutral, meaning that when they assess the reasonable person, They assess it without the lens that the person had specialized training or experience in the situation that presented itself. Which means that your conduct is actually judged by a less standard than someone who would be trained in that position. A good example would be a doctor. So doctors and negligence go, they're often the subject of a negligence lawsuit. When and you know what, I don't want to get into like malpractice law, but just consider for a second a doctor who performs emergency first aid on the side of the street. And in doing so, the person they're performing the emergency first aid on dies. And the doctor is sued or charged for negligence. They're not going to assess what a reasonable doctor would have done in the analysis. Instead, they're going to analyze what a reasonable person, a non-doctor, would have done. And so you can see how that would benefit the doctor. Simply falling below the standard of an average doctor does not render him criminally liable. Of course, there's the civil lawsuit, right? The malpractice, like the civil side, we're just going to leave that aside. We're just worried about the criminal, right? To send a doctor to jail for the negligent death of another person, you assess what a reasonable person, a non-doctor, would have done in that same situation. If the doctor's actions are consistent with the reasonable non-doctor, then not guilty. If the doctor's actions are a departure from what a reasonable non-doctor would have done in that situation, then guilty. I hope that cleared it up. Negligence, like I said, it can be its whole course on its own, and I don't have time to go over all of the situations, but I hope that cleared up just what we mean when we say that you're handling something in a negligent manner. Alec Baldwin's familiarity and training, professional training with firearms instruction, is irrelevant in this situation. Was his conduct objectively dangerous? And so that is going to be up for the jury to decide. I think that's again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm less of a U.S. lawyer. And again, it's not legal advice, classic. Here, let me put my disclaimer up. Right? I'm not a lawyer. It's not legal advice. Contact a lawyer in your jurisdiction. So this is how I read it as a law student. Now, again, if you're going to, the involuntary manslaughter has an underlying offense. So now you have to prove the actus reus and the mens rea of this underlying offense in order to get to the mens rea of the involuntary manslaughter. Let's not forget, I know I went on a bit of a tangent there, but let's not forget where we are in terms of this analysis. This is the actus reus of the offense. Endangering safety by the handling or use of a firearm. That's the act. The key word here for the mens rea is negligence. So if you are negligent and you are handling a deadly weapon, if you were negligent in the handling of that deadly weapon, then you have committed this offense. Put simply, negligence is, we defined it further below, right? The departure from conduct that is normally expected of people in their public affairs. So if you've established those two elements, and again, it's going to be beyond a reasonable doubt. You have to establish that these occurred beyond a reasonable doubt. And then you get to come back out of the negligent use of a deadly weapon. One more note. It is a petty misdemeanor. Negligent use of a deadly weapon is a petty misdemeanor offense. Remember, it is an unlawful act not amounting to felony. for involuntary manslaughter? Well, a petty misdemeanor is not a felony. Okay, so that is the actus reus. And of course, the mens rea was embedded in here with the negligence. So you can substitute in the facts of this case and reread the crime. And this is what they're going, this is the state theory, right? Alec Baldwin committed involuntary manslaughter because he committed a manslaughter while committing negligent use of a deadly weapon. It was the unlawful killing of a human being without malice, with via negligence of handling a deadly weapon, which is unlawful. So I hope the hand gestures help. Yeah, you build it's like a blockchain, right? You build a chain. You start with the negligence. You were negligent in handling a firearm. That firearm results in the killing of a person. Now, this killing of the person was without malice. It wasn't on purpose. It wasn't with intent. But it was the death of a human through an unlawful act. And that is how we get to involuntary manslaughter. Now, I don't want to speculate too much on the defenses that Alec Baldwin is going to raise, but I do want to address the mistake of fact that hangs over this case. Now, there's two mistakes you can make in terms of criminal liability. There's mistake of law, which is the familiar ignorance of the law is not an excuse. You didn't know that careless handling or negligent handling of a firearm was illegal. That's not an excuse. But if you were told and it was reasonable to believe that the gun had no live rounds in it, that is a mistake of fact. And that is a mistake that it will be a defense against this crime. I think what the jury needs to decide is, should Alec Baldwin have checked the gun instead of just taking Assistant Director Hall's assertion that it was safe? There's been some quotes in the media from industry, insiders that say it's normal practice for actors to double check firearms. But I wonder how much, because most movie actors are not experts in firearms. That's why they hire outside assistants for that kind of stuff. I wonder what the reasonable person standard here is. Is it reasonable to be told by someone that the gun is safe, be handed the gun, and then operate under that assumption? Conversely, is it reasonable to not believe when someone hands you a gun and tell you it's safe so that you would check it yourself? Because that will determine guilt or acquittal in this case. If the jury believes that a reasonable person would not automatically assume that when they're handed a gun and told it's safe, would not automatically assume it's safe, then the reasonable person should check the firearm to make sure it's safe. But if the jury believes that a objective person, not a movie actor, not an armor, not a cinematographer, just a normal, reasonable person, when handed a gun and told it's a cold gun, it's safe, there's no live rounds in it, and it's reasonable to accept that and operate under that assumption, then I think Alec Baldwin will be found not guilty. And so it's going to be up to the lawyers to make compelling arguments. How do the facts fit the law? Because Alec Baldwin is going to be judged by a jury of his peers. And so it's up to them to say, what would a reasonable person do when they handle a firearm? Would a reasonable person and I repeat myself, right? But just to drive the point home, right? Just to drive this point home, and I'll repeat myself for what, a fourth time to end this video. Is it reasonable to expect that Alec Baldwin checked the gun before using it? Or is it reasonable that Alec Baldwin, being told the gun was safe, didn't check it? Because which way the jury goes is likely going to determine whether he's guilty or innocent. Well, actually, not innocent, not guilty. Guilty or not guilty. A reminder that juries do not find you innocent. They only find you guilty or not guilty, or there's a mistrial. So I hope this gave you a little bit of insight as to just how a law student thinks when they see these words on paper. Of course, like I said at the top of the video, if you want a more in-depth breakdown of the applying the facts to the law and looking up authorities and citations, I would recommend a channel featuring an actual lawyer, an American lawyer, first of all, and a lawyer who specializes in firearm crimes. An experienced trial litigator would be able to tell you, well, here's how this will go down in the courtroom. I don't have that experience. So my only perspective is my speculation, my theories, and my point of view, the way I see things, based on the writing that I see on the paper, or in this case, the computer screen. So again, I hope it was informative. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry I've been gone so much. The winter holidays were insane. I got caught up with some work. I'm just starting to get back into a normal rhythm. Of course, I do have full-time law school on top of all of this. So I hope to be putting out some more frequent content. I have a few videos that I'm working on. I want to do a video about family law. And I've reached out to a potential guest who has served as a guardian ad litem. My American audience would know that as a in the context of family law, someone who represents the interests of the child as a neutral third party outside of the parents of the child or the family, the immediate family of the child. They're just simply a kind of a neutral arbiter for the child's best interests and representing the child's interests during the proceedings. In Canada, we don't use that terminology a lot. I don't think at all. We have a different name for kind of I think it's called a parenting advocate, which is supposed to be, again, just a neutral third party who represents the interests of the child in the context of family court proceedings. So that's the video I'm trying to work on. I have to book this guest who apparently is in the middle of moving right now. So that might be I might have to push that down a little bit. I certainly want to do a follow-up to the interview I had with Fair and Balanced because election season is coming upon us. We're going to be getting the warm-ups and leading into the primaries. Of course, the Republican primary is going to start heating up this year. And that U.S. presidential election gets closer and closer every day. It's going to be fun. But until next time, everyone, stay frosty.